Welcome to the Latest.com show. I'm Igor Darish. Joining us from Canada, he's a staff writer at Latest.com and a contributor at Issue Hawk. All the way from Toronto, Eric Carrier. And he's a military vet and Latest.com senior political analyst. All the way from Pittsburgh, Josh Patton. And he's a 24-year veteran of the U.S. State Department and the author of We Meant Well from New York, Peter Van Buren. All right, so we're now on day 6 of what the media is calling an armed standoff in Oregon, but I don't know who they're really standing up against because there's no real law enforcement presence there. I know they're in the middle of nowhere, so they're not really posing a huge risk, and, the feds are always worried about another Waco. But, Josh, are they really just going to let these militants with assault rifles just hold this space indefinitely?
I mean, I don't know about indefinitely, but I think they are definitely ready to play the long game on this, especially since, winter is getting more and more harsh now, especially out there. It's going to be, weather's going to be a challenge. I think they're expecting at least the majority of them to pack it in and go home, especially if the media attention dies down.
Well, earlier this week, the militia was allegedly told that there's warrants to arrest 5 of them, and the group began to set up defensive positions around the camp. Eric, when things do go down, do you think that this can actually be resolved peacefully?
I guess it depends how willing these guys are to actually pull the trigger on their guns. I mean, they've made it seem like they're interested in doing that, but it's a different story when you're actually confronted. I don't think any bullets were traded at the Bundy Ranch, if I recall. It eventually kind of resolved, and that was that. It's a lot of talk from a bunch of, cowboy-style guys that think that they can live in the Wild West. I think they have more bark than they have bite.
Well, at the Bundy Ranch, the feds stood down and pretty much allowed Cliven Bundy to keep not paying his taxes, to keep, to get his cattle back. Peter, the demands here are a little more intricate, and they're probably not going to get what they want, which is the government ceding federal lands to basically them.
Well, a timely drone strike could easily clear this thing up. But no, I think I agree with my colleagues. First of all, there's not going to be any kind of serious standoff because the last thing the federal government wants to do is martyr these guys. We can't seem to learn that lesson overseas with ISIS or Al-Qaeda, but I think that we've got it here in the United States. A standoff is just going to create another legend, Waco, Ruby Ridge, things like this. So if I were the federal government, I would cut off the electricity, the water, the internet. Nothing gets in or out. Put a cordon around it and let them sit in there until they freeze up and eventually slunk home. I mean, nothing would send a stronger signal that they are the complete losers that we all know they are than one day they just kind of walk out and go home. If they want to put tacos out at the end of the driveway to kind of lure them out or something like that, that would be interesting. But otherwise, the less the government does,
a case of Keystone Light, I think, would do it.
Yeah, okay. The less the government does, the better.
There's some turmoil developing between the different participants as well. In one of the stories I was writing today, there was an individual, Raya Buddha Cavalier, who I guess has left since occupying it after stories came up that he was lying about his service. So there's certain people that are starting to cave. There was the other guy yesterday, too, with that weird name, Finicum or something, that he said he was ready to die for the cause, but just a couple hours before that, he had went to the media and said something along the lines of that he wanted to get home and return to his cows. They were lost and wandering. Probably government land, but you know what I mean? So I don't think that they're all as devout to the cause as they made it out to be. When we see the Ammon Bundys coming in the media and we're ready to fight till the death and stay here and take the government down, that's just the minority. I don't think most of those guys will do that. And shit hits the fan, they're going to take off.
It actually kind of reminds me of those kids that flew Canada or Europe to go join ISIS, and then they get there and it's there's not even working toilets here. This sounded like a good idea at the time.
Was that the 2 girls that got pregnant and stuff too?
No, it was a Canadian kid.
Okay.
Anyway. To what Peter was saying, it's ironic because how little has been done. You said that they could turn off the electricity and water. They haven't done yet. And they can't actually lure them out because from what they say, they're free to come and go as they please. So why do you think so little has been done on, not even in terms of just sending armed officers over there, but just to cut off resources? Peter?
Well, it's the same idea. I mean, the more attention you give them, which is what they want. Like any kind of pretend terrorist or real terrorist, what they want is media attention. They want to provoke something, and the federal government and local law enforcement just seem to be treating them like pranksters and ignoring them. And I think that's a very effective strategy. The last thing you want to do is give these guys anything more to work with. And of course, you don't want to have something happen that will fuel another 6 weeks of Trumpisms over this kind of thing. So, I'd still shut off the electricity just to kind of let them know, we're still out here. But otherwise, they're silly kids. Leave them alone. They'll probably shoot themselves in the foot anyway.
I'm surprised one hasn't. Josh, and as far as the Clive and Bundy ranch, there was not just no prosecutions, but they pretty much let him have everything he wanted. Do you think there'll be prosecutions once this thing is settled?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I know that they're talking about bringing charges, and that just might be sort of a leverage thing. The difference between the Clive and Bundy thing and this is that until Clive and Bundy started talking about why the Negro was better off as a slave, he was pretty sympathetic in the media. Even Fox News, who, for all its right leanings, is much more establishment right than libertarian, don't tread on me Gadsden flag right. But since the beginning of this standoff, I do believe that no one of note has come out in support of them. I mean, even Alex Jones, the king of the cranks, said that these guys are assholes. So I really think that, the government might not come down hard on them, because the last thing they want are people digging into the real issue behind it. Like, if there wasn't this standoff, we would probably be talking about how the federal government owns 59.2% of land. Where is, I think, in Oregon. I forget the stat, but it owns a significant amount of land, and that is questionable. There's a reason, like, why does the government need all this land, and so on and so forth? That's a real question, not a question worth making Fort asshole in the wildlife refuge. But so I think what'll happen is that once this all dies down, if there's no violence, there may be charges, there may not be. I think they just want it to go away.
Well, to your point about how much land the government owns, I mean, it's public land. It's not like the government uses it. It allows the public to use it for, fees. Why is that? I mean, if it's public land and you're getting a huge discount instead of, purchasing the land privately, why is that a problem?
Again, that's not I don't have a dog in that fight. I was saying that there are legitimate concerns, like, that someone could talk about. Like, if there are probably arguments for and against both, and both of them are probably right in some ways, but legitimacy aside, or any legitimate discussion about whatever these concerns are, is being dumped down the toilet, or the chamber pot, as it were, because these guys are putting on a spectacle.
Well, this is the second time now in 2 years this has more or less happened, and the federal government has really not done anything. When you look at how easy it was for these guys to occupy a federal building, and as well as get their message out through every single media outlet, do you think that since we've seen a rise of militias around the U.S., Peter, do you think that we're going to see more of this coming?
Well, first I want to ask Josh if the term Fort Asshole is copyrighted by him, because otherwise I'd like to take that. I think we want to be careful what we're actually describing here. I mean, this is a bunch of rural yahoos who took over a wildlife refuge station. I mean, this is like occupying a Jersey Turnpike toilet. It technically is a federal structure, but I mean, it's nothing nowhere. And the only reason we even know about this, so it's not just some, up to the local sheriff to say, come on, boys, time to go home, is because the media, A, chases any controversy, and B, we have this right-wing media who has wet dreams, hoping there's going to be some kind of armed militia rising up from the Walmarts to take back our country. It represents very little other than white guy anger, and it doesn't even do a particularly good job of that. If it was me, I wouldn't devote any media time to it, really. They're just silly people who shouldn't be talked about, and well, that's all I've got to say about that.
Well, to make things worse, the catalyst for this event, the Hammonds, they've distanced themselves from it completely. They don't want any part of it, yet here these people are occupying wildlife or Fort Asshole to try to push the land rights. It's interesting, whenever the people you're doing this for don't want any part of you.
Yeah, well, on the topic of right-wing nuts, President Obama announced this week that he's expanding gun background checks, and the conservatives freaked out over the latest Obama gun grab. Obviously, the executive order doesn't do that, and doesn't even close the gun show loophole like a lot of people were saying. In fact, a lot of critics are arguing that this action is not going to affect the right. This action, which was actually done in response to rising mass shootings, wouldn't have affected a single one of them. Josh, do you think that this is an effective way to at least get the ball rolling on common sense ways to combat, the country's massive gun violence problem, or is it just for show?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. The extent to which these measures are tepid and toothless, and like you point out, it doesn't close the gun show loophole or anything. I think that's because it was carefully done to withstand the inevitable legal challenges that they are going to face. And I do think that it's for show. I do think that President Obama and the White House do want to at least appear to be doing something about guns. And while the Associated Press and, the conservative outlet that it is, ruled that this wouldn't have stopped any mass shootings, they did point out that these are actually, the area that it most poses to affect is suicides, which make up 2/3 of gun deaths. Now, whether that'll actually work or not, who knows? But I do think that it is an attempt to do something. And, when it comes to suicide, people don't typically care as much as they do about, say, murders, whether it's crime in Chicago or rampage killings. But the fact that it is 2/3 of the over 30,000 gun deaths a year is nothing to sneeze at.
To what you just said, one of the most mind-blowing arguments against Obama's action I heard came from Glenn Beck, who said that the same way that if you ban abortions, people will get back alley abortions. If you ban mentally ill people from getting guns, they'll go and seek out back alley ways to commit suicide. Just mind blown. But Peter, do you think that this is really an effective way to start going after gun violence in America, or is this really just as toothless as Josh said?
It's 90% plus show. Obama was under tremendous pressure to do something, and he knows that he can't possibly get any real laws passed. And check me on this, gentlemen. I think it was what he called a presidential directive, not an executive order or executive directive, which has the power of nothing. An executive order or presidential order can actually compel people in the executive branch, the IRS or the State Department, to actually do something. They have to follow that, or take up, residence in a wildlife refuge with guns. But with a presidential directive, it's basically kind of like, don't forget your coat when you go out. It
does clarify the federal law that it applies to more than just gun shops.
And the ATF and things like that are already under the executive purview anyway. So, to be honest, that directive thing is news to me, but I would think that...
Check me on that. But let's go back. I mean, whatever you want to call it, whatever it was, I mean, there are so many holes in it. It looks like someone shot it up with a machine gun. I mean, go back to
no pun intended.
Yeah, touche, Mr. Ford asshole. I mean, no, I mean, you take a look at the gun show loophole, and for those of our listeners who are just waking up from their New Year's comas. I mean, this is basically if you go to a gun shop, a licensed gun shop, and you say, "I'd like to purchase, machine guns, please." They have to run your name through a federal database that shows you're not a mentally ill person or a felon or a couple of very narrow categories that would eliminate you. However, if you purchase a gun privately, anything from Josh selling me his weapon to me going to a gun show where there's a dealer who has a table full of weapons, then there's no real requirement for this name check, this background check. There's a few states that throw up some obstacles, but the basic idea is a private sale is a private sale. This is called the gun show loophole. So a guy who legally can't buy a firearm at a gun store can go to one of these private situations and just pick it up, no questions asked. Obama is saying we need to close that loophole, as gun control advocates have been saying for decades. The thing is that Obama's order, directive, whatever you want to call it, actually says, well, it's only going to apply to people, I think what the exact words, whose primary business is selling guns. I mean, some of these gun show dealers, this is what they do. Every Saturday and Sunday, they're someplace else selling their stuff. Same way people do travel around selling baseball cards or coins or whatever. So there's going to be this question about what constitutes their main business, a question of who's going to actually enforce it. I mean, the ATF is going to swoop down on gun shows and say, by the way, sir, how much money do you make a year selling guns? Well, nothing. First time you're it's an unenforceable thing. It will not stop realistically anything else. I suspect Obama was just under pressure to do something. And as Josh said, I mean, he knew he was going to take flack over whatever he said. And I think he just punted on this one, shed a few tears, perhaps for what's left of our country, and then, bailed out. It was
an onion.
unspectacular.
It was an onion.
Oh, yeah.
Obama, aside from the directive, also talked about smart guns as a way to prevent unregistered gun owners and children from being able to use firearms, likening it to medicine bottles. Eric, do you think that pushing gun manufacturers to create more of these ways that only one person or licensed user can use the gun is a way to make a dent in what would essentially be a gun violence epidemic in this country?
Well, I was looking into smart guns because I wanted to try to understand more about them. Speak about it, but from my understanding, it puts like a lock on it or some kind of fingerprint or some kind of mechanism to stop people from using, which is fine. But first off, I think eventually that could be hacked or they could be basically compromised in such a way that the gun can still be used. Also, it puts a burden on society to want to adopt those, and if you have people right now, they'll just avoid buying smart guns and they'll still buy the other ones that do not have that kind of technology. And then I guess it also begs the question of how well will this technology work? I don't think it's a bad thing to implement it. And I think with all of this new directive order for gun control, it's more of like a safe point for the Democrats. They released a bunch of talking points. None of them really go too far or do too much, but it's all things that the Republicans can't challenge without looking like it's background checks. Okay, that's fair. Let's make sure guns go into people's hands that aren't going to go shoot up the school. Okay, if a Republican disagrees with that, makes them look stupid. Smart guns. That might be the one they fight.
It might
the
make
most
them look
because...
stupid, but it certainly hasn't stopped most Republicans from coming out against the...
No, of course.
Yeah.
About
the smart guns.
Hmm?
I was just going to say about the smart guns. I mean, there is a very key reason why that isn't going on. Because again, I think it would probably work as well as, say, your fingerprint sensor on your cell phone, which, maybe 50% of the time. And there's arguments that, like, especially if it's a police officer and for some reason the biometrics don't work, that could end up that could result in a dead cop. But I do think that, we do live in a free market society, at the risk of sounding like I should be joining my pals at the refuge. If they put them on the market, gun owners can buy them, not buy them, however they want. The technology can improve or stagnate as it does.
That's right.
But the thing that's preventing it is that there is a law in the books in New Jersey that says the second a smart gun is available for sale in the United States anywhere, the only guns that can be sold in New Jersey are smart guns.
Right.
And so that alone is why, whether gun owners like it or not, or the NRA likes high-tech guns or not, they're going to fight it tooth and nail.
Well, it begs the question, too, is that, like you said, that law especially, but if that became a national thing where if smart guns existed, that was the only one you could purchase, first, how do you filter all these old guns out of society? You can't. And so then you're trapped with, people that have old-style guns and smart guns, and the government can't regulate that. There's no possible way. So really,
there's people who still use flip phones. I have a friend who she refuses to use a phone other than a flip phone. So,
right.
Even if 90% of people are like, I want a damn smart gun, there are still going to be people who want a revolver or your standard Glock.
Sure. Or flintlock rifles. The only thing that might
muskets.
Some muskets. The only thing that gives this potentially, and this sounds even more cynical than usual here today, potentially some legs, is the gun manufacturers couldn't see a giant opportunity. This is like getting everybody to switch from vinyl to CDs to downloading back to vinyl. How the hell many times do I have to buy Kiss Alive to keep up with the newest format? And so the idea of saying, we can get a percentage of gun owners to go out and buy brand new guns, smart guns, and certainly smart guns are going to cost more than dumb guns, I guess. There might be a little bit of push from the manufacturers. That said, what we're talking about here basically is trying to legislate in some way responsible gun ownership. And there are other things that could be done. For example, I would have liked to hear Obama talk about the responsibility of the gun owner to control his or her weapon. In other words, if a kid, and we've done some articles on Latest.com about how many children have picked up firearms and shot somebody, oftentimes themselves or a sibling. If a child picks up a loaded weapon at home, then the parent has some responsibility. The parent can be arrested based on that type of thing. If a gun owner doesn't have a gun safe, for example, in his or her house, and a thief comes in and steals the guns, the gun owner has some kind of liability for that. None of these things are perfect. None of them are, wait for it, the magic bullet to solve this problem. But they're all part of a solution, and the smarter we are, and I think the simpler we are. Great, let's let the research continue on smart guns. I think there's some value there. But we could start very easily with laws about gun safes or parental responsibility or anything along those lines. And I think...
Well, that's the real crime of the NRA, is because we are having a one-sided discussion about guns. There's one party talking about trying to do something about guns, and then the other party is saying, fuck you from my cold, dead hands. If we could have, say, Republicans sort of ideas and input of responsible ways to address gun problems with gun violence, it would be I think the solutions we would come up with would be better. It's because when, tunnel vision is never good for any issue. And so when you have one side that gets no pushback and is not forced to evolve their ideas or thinking in any way because it's not challenged in a reasonable way, you are going to end up with things like these executive orders that sound good but really don't amount to much.
Well, and let me play devil's advocate on this when you were talking about how we should enforce a law maybe to lock guns up. But then I guess the other end of the argument is if your house is getting robbed and you're fumbling with the keys trying to open your gun safe through the two locks, and then you get shot by the robber. Like, I am by no means a huge gun supporter or anything like that, but I could see that side of the argument as well.
Oh, no, there's even an easier one, the equal protection, a Supreme Court case that requiring people to buy an expensive gun safe or whatever to exercise their constitutional right to bear arms violates the equal protection clause. I could see that argument being made. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying that's how that would work.
That's fascinating in an absolute evil way is how somehow we have evolved that the only amendment of the Constitution that is not allowed to have any restraint built into it is the Second Amendment. we have throughout our history played with the First Amendment, the rights to free speech in particular, trying to delineate where those boundaries of free speech are. And we've come to conclusions such as you can't willfully start a riot and call that free speech. That's the so-called shouting fire in a crowded theater argument. And we constantly are pushing back and forth on what constitutes free speech, and there's court cases all the time about that. The same thing for the Fourth and Fifth Amendment, particularly in the days now of when we find out what the NSA and the government have been doing. The point is that we are willing to put all of those key amendments to the test of the court, and we are always willing to kind of experiment with pushing them one way or the other. But with the evil genius of the NRA, and I got to hand it to them, they have created a situation where any attempt to even examine some type of boundaries of the Second Amendment calls up this groundswell of psychotic people. Obama's going to take away our guns, and the Republicans have managed to twist what should be a legal constitutional question. I mean, this should be being debated in front of the Supreme Court, not on Fox News. They've managed to take this and wrap themselves in it as a red, white, and blue issue, and say as soon as a Democrat uses the word gun, please everyone overreact, panic, and send donations to us and the NRA. It's an incredible situation that we found ourselves in, and again, it's limited to the Second Amendment.
Josh, what does it take?
Well, you're right.
The power of the NRA when you have 90% of people support what Obama did, even more than 80% of Republicans and more than 80% of gun owners, and yet forget just gun nuts. You had the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, come out immediately after the speech and say this will not stand.
I think what it shows is not so much some sort of insidious power of the NRA, but just how crucial it is for a special interest group to be so singularly focused. I mean, when you look at, say, the labor movement or even energy special interests, there's all sorts of different areas that they're interested in or commenting on. But when it comes to gun control, the NRA is so laser focused and is able to fire up the passions of their supporters in a way unlike any other special interest, that it becomes this sort of unstoppable wave of anti-gun pushback, And while that is terrible, and there is no other sort of issue where that kind of response happens, I do kind of want to push back against what Peter said about the Second Amendment, because of course there's just as many limitations on that as free speech, and Fourth Amendment is basically gone. That is one I do wish we talked about more.
Wait, what are some of the Second Amendment restraints?
Just, the fact that background checks exist at all, the fact that, prisoners can, convicts lose the right to bear arms. I mean, it's the restrictions that are few and far between that are there are done through due process. It's about getting due process. It's why, for example, the not letting the people on the terrorist watch list buy guns is a bad precedent, legally speaking, rather than practically speaking, in that, maybe they shouldn't have guns. Because, again, it's denying constitutional rights without due process, which is exactly what happens in the Fourth Amendment.
There are more restraints to get a driver's license than to get a gun. I mean, I don't think...
But driving that's not a constitutional right. I mean... and again, in the same poll of people who supported the background checks and mental health, I think somewhere around 70% of gun owners and non-gun owners alike supported licensing for handguns, which, again, passed through Congress. That would be an interesting sort of constitutional question, because then do you have to get licensed to free speech? I mean, the Second Amendment is the fucking problem. And if there was a way you could, I don't know, change the Constitution and maybe fix that one up, this might be a whole different discussion. But, there are, well, I'm just saying you could have, pass the 28th Amendment, what are we on now? Repealing the Second Amendment. It's been done before. amendments get rewritten and reworked. Again,
tough
never happened. The NRA would literally take over. Like that would be it if they tried to
occupy the United States.
Holy shit, they would. But I think it does raise interesting constitutional questions. I mean, it's easy because the issue itself makes sense. Let's not let bad people have guns, but determining how they're bad and the fact that it's tied to the Constitution is why again, to go back to my former point, it would be nice to have a different perspective, a different political perspective on how you could do responsible gun control rather than the gun control side and the hell no side.
There was one of the great George Romero zombie movies, Dawn of the Dead, which was filmed at the Monroe Mall in Pittsburgh.
Monroeville Mall.
Monroeville. I actually made a
last mall you could smoke in. It was a big deal.
Where they shot the zombie movie. There's a great scene where the guy's getting his blood pressure checked in some machine, and the zombie tears the arm off, and the arm is left. I actually had a photo of me taken in that machine.
Nice.
But that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is that movie starts off with all these experts on TV sort of arguing point counterpoint about what to do about the zombies, and should we shoot them or should we try to make peace with them or this, that, and the other thing, and then of course the zombies come in and shred them and kind of end the argument. We and we're doing it here because we're Latest.com, so fuck you. But I mean, the idea would be that the government shouldn't be sitting around just talking about this. We are facing an epidemic of gun violence and gun deaths in our country. We have a situation literally unique in the world in terms of what's going on with guns. I love the Constitution. I respect the Constitution, but the Constitution was never written as an absolutist document. This has been shown throughout our history. The founders were very clear on this. It was a living document. And so simply to say some line about, raising a well-regulated militia somehow translates into we can't license gun owners or we can't require people to have safety training before they buy a machine gun. I'm just refusing to accept that. I think that we are at a point where this is essentially a public safety crisis. This is like Ebola running loose. We determined, for example, during the fake Ebola epidemic scare, that the government had some rights to sort of basically hold people against their will to protect the population. If you had Ebola, you could just walk around coughing on people. It was a public health issue. And then we're at that point with guns now. I mean, it's time for it's the Second Amendment stuff to really kind of turn it down a couple of notches. Let's stop killing our children, and let's find a way that we can stop being the exceptional nation in terms of the way guns are handled here, are used here, and essentially are allowed to go anywhere they want, any way they want. We need to do something about it now. And if that means figuring out the right ways to do it, that's a great thing. If it means constantly saying, The Onion did a great piece. There's nothing that can be done about this, says the nation where it's the only nation in the world where it happens. Every time there's another mass killing. I'm surprised we don't have a current mass killing to talk about, but we will. If not this week, we'll have one next week.
Ouch. But it starts with the people that we elect. I mean, we continuously elect these old dinosaur politicians that will not change things because mainly they're responding to lobbyists and their pressure groups. But time and time again, we elect these people. Why?
I think the young libertarians are actually worse than the old guard. But all right, let's move on.
Yeah, they're on the same. They're on par with that.
I think they're worse. I think people like Joni Ernst and Tom Cotton are worse. But let's talk about what's going on.
The fact is we elect those people.
Oh, well, we personally don't, but someone in Iowa did, yeah.
Right.
Well, that's the funny thing about Congress. It's got the lowest approval rating of all time, but people still love their congressman.
Yeah. Let's move on to the Middle East, where things are surprisingly, there's a conflict, you guys. There's a conflict in the Middle East.
In the Middle East?
Not in the Middle East, no way.
So just to recap, American ally Saudi Arabia, a country that's mostly Sunni, beheaded a prominent Shia cleric and angered the hell out of all the Shia countries, most notably Iran. And a group of Iranians set fire to the Saudi embassy in the country. The two countries severed all diplomatic ties, and yesterday Saudi Arabia apparently bombed the Iranian embassy in Yemen. Peter, the Sunni and Shiite countries are like forming coalitions now. It's already getting violent. What's going on?
There's a lot of things going on. I mean, the very short situation is that this is spinning further and further out of anyone's control. Once you set everybody into motion here, it gets very, very hard to tamp it down. And there's so many motivators to people's violence. There's religious motivators, there's political motivators, there's territorial and resource motivators. Once you get all that stuff going, it becomes a very, very difficult thing to slow down. And this is why people talk about comparisons to World War I. Not that this is a world war per se, but the idea of with World War I, you put so many pieces in motion that no one was able to stop the war from starting, even when some people wanted to stop it. So real quick, we've got Saudi and Iran are the two main powers in the Middle East. And they compete geopolitically as well as having their religious frictions, which just add to that and oftentimes create both the reason for fighting and sometimes an excuse for doing it. But basically, you've got a significant regional power struggle going on here. The Saudis are on the losing end of that currently. They have lost a lot of their influence in places like Syria. They've had it pulled out from underneath them in Iraq, which is currently used to be a secular country with a Sunni based government that fought against the Shias of Iran. Now, thanks to the United States invasion, which tipped over the whole cart, you've got a Shia country in Iraq that is hand in glove with Iran. That's Iranian power growing, Sunni power falling down. At the same time, oil prices are falling precipitously. The Saudis have a $107 billion deficit that they're not in a position to make up with falling oil prices. And one of their largest customers, and certainly their protector, the United States, is far more energy independent than it's ever been. The Saudis are in a rough spot.
Thanks, Obama.
Yeah, thanks, Obama. So throw in then the problems that are going on inside Fort Asshole in Riyadh. You've got a king there that was not appointed following the traditional succession of the monarchy. The old guy that died last year sometime appointed, I think it's his nephew, who has set up, the nephew's son is set up to be the next king. This whole line of succession cut out all the brothers. You've got, and when the brothers get angry, things go bad. You've got a whole bunch of people. This is Game of Thrones. You've got a whole bunch of people internally who are not supporting the monarchy and who are talking about coups, who are talking about overthrows. Funny words are being used. At that point, if you're Saudi, you're going to lash out, and that's what you're seeing. You're seeing stirring up external troubles to take people's minds off it inside the country, and you're stirring up external troubles in hopes that you can push the Iranians back in Yemen, in Syria, and maybe, cross your fingers, if you can really do it, bring the United States in on your own side, on the Saudi side. It's a mess, and I can't see anything good in the near to midterm coming out of this. Long term in the Middle East, anybody who tries to predict long term is a fool. But certainly into the midterm, this is, like the thing goes, there will be blood.
Certainly, I don't think there's going to be anything good, but how bad can it get? This is a region that's certainly no stranger to armed conflict. How bad can things get between Iran and Saudi Arabia if they're already, exchanging embassy missiles?
Well,
how bad can they get? They can get real bad. Imagine some type of upheaval in Saudi Arabia, an Arab Spring, a military coup, something that turns what has been a stable nation into a very unstable nation. Keep in mind, 10 to 15% of Saudi's population are Shias. They share a border with Yemen, which right now is a chaotic state. They have Syria, which is a chaotic state. So you could have Saudi Arabia in a semi-chaotic situation. You could even have some form of internal, it wouldn't quite qualify as a civil war, but certainly civil strife. You could have an angry Saudi regime decide to acquire or create a nuclear weapon, which would immediately force the Iranians to do the same thing. You could see a loose situation in Saudi that frightens the Israelis into some form of action. There's so many sparks. You just pick the one that has to go off, and things will get real bad. The Iranians have weapons that can reach, missiles that can reach into Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have the same. Everybody's got oil tankers transiting through the Gulf. If you can find a way to trick the United States into getting involved, and that doesn't seem to be very hard in the Middle East, then you have the Russians. I could go on for hours coming up with scenarios, but again, you just need that one spark in this area, and it'll be hard to put the fire out.
Josh, you and Peter
Well,
are
the one
strangers to regions with Shiite-Sunni conflict. What do you think happens next?
Well, I think that the more important than that religious struggle, I think it's the religious pursuit of money that makes this more interesting than, say, other dust-ups in the past. Iran's sanctions have gone away and are going away. They're getting back into the world stage, and that was sort of one thing that Saudi Arabia had exclusivity over, which was being sort of like the Muslim leader of the world, because Iranians was basically the Muslim enemy of the world. So since that dynamic is changing, plus Iran's getting involved with OPEC, and the oil prices are as low as they are, there's a lot less. 10 years ago this wouldn't have happened because there's a lot of money to lose. Oil was at its height, and there was just way too much money to be made to be bothered fighting about it. Now that it's like $30 a barrel or whatever it is recently, and the economy globally is shaky with China right now, the fact that oil is so low, I think, could lead to a kind of unrest and a kind of lack of control that we're not used to seeing from Saudi Arabia, especially. And the other interesting thing too, and I didn't know if you really mentioned this, Peter, is that Saudi Arabia is getting sort of it from both sides. They're getting it from the Iran Shia side, but then they're also getting it from the international stage from their extreme, which is ISIS, and Islamic State. They are the sort of the extreme version. What would be interesting is if Saudi Arabia declared war on Iran or something like that, would they accept the Islamic State's help? I mean, that is the Sunni-Shia conflict that everyone dreading, or, would it not get that far? As Peter said, there's way more known unknowns than known unknowns, and I think that's what makes this a particularly touchy time for these kind of dust-ups.
Let me pick up on the Sunni thing, because we have to keep in mind that whenever we talk about these groups, Sunni, Shia, whatever, I mean, there's far more nuances involved in any of these than one word will cover. But in particular, what scares the poo out of the Saudis is
language.
What scares the shit out of the Saudis is the way is ISIS and is Al Qaeda, because those two organizations, in a list of things they don't like around the world, have already sworn to destroy the Saudi monarchy. They believe that the Saudi monarchs are apostates, that they are non-believers, that they are an insult to Islam. And all these young Saudi men who are already disgruntled at home, who go off to jihad, the ones that come back to Saudi come back, as Americans would describe it, radicalized. They've been to jihad. They have internalized this different version of Islam that would not support the Saudi monarchy. They represent an extraordinary internal threat to the Saudi government. let me throw one more religious situation out there, and this is depending maybe a little far-fetched, but let's think it through. Saudi Arabia in Arabic is also referred to as the keeper or the protector of the two shrines. The holiest sites in Islam are inside of Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis, in addition to running their country and everything, have this worldwide duty for 1 billion Muslims of protecting Mecca and Medina and the holy shrines there. They also have the duty globally of facilitating the Hajj, the thing that every Muslim is supposed to try to do, get him or herself to Saudi Arabia and make this spiritual journey. Imagine, if you will, ISIS or someone deciding that the monarchy is no longer able to fulfill its duties as a protector of these shrines, and there's some kind of attempt to take over those areas, to seize control of them. You've got a situation then when you're looking at perhaps the Saudi military shooting at Sunnis inside of Mecca. I mean, it can get nutty really, really quickly. And particularly if it takes place during the Hajj, when it's going to be very obvious that Saudis can't protect the people there. Again, it only takes a little spark, and this whole thing is going to go to hell very, very quickly.
Well, I was watching some Middle East so-called experts talk about this, and I mean, this whole thing started with the beheading of the Shia cleric, but that day they beheaded 46 other people to cap off a year where they beheaded more people than they have in the last 20 years. And what they were saying was basically that this newfound brutality is a way for them to compete with ISIS for the soul of Sunni Islam. Peter, do you think that's accurate, or?
No, I don't. I think first there were 4 Shias who were lopped off that same day. So there were 40.
No, I meant
42
not the killing of Shiites, just the beheadings.
I think the beheading of the Sunni people who were all said to be Al Qaeda, who really knows. I think that was a very powerful internal signal the Saudi government was sending to its own people more than anyone else. It was telling all these young jihadis, the young Saudis who were part of all this, back off because we're not afraid to get you guys too. I don't know how far that extended outside of Saudi's borders. I mean, their intention, at least. Though, again, these are tough kind of questions to parse out. What was the Saudi king personally thinking when he signed off on this? It's tough.
Well, I don't think it has anything to do with the soul of Sunni Islam. I think it's more just like Peter was saying. It was a show of strength because for the past year, the so-called Islamic State looked like they owned the entire fucking Middle East. Like, beyond the Levant, they owned it all. And they had the whole world scared of them. So I think that Peter's right, that was a message for people in Saudi Arabia where brutality is equated with strength. Thankfully, not like here in America. We're beyond such things, he says sarcastically. But I think that's what it was. I think it was just a show of strength. I'm sorry, Eric.
Well, I was just going to mention, we talk about how we accept that Saudi Arabia is brutal and something that should be normal for them. But I think it's ultra hypocritical. In no way am I defending ISIS, but I mean, when they do it, it's bad. But when the Saudis do it, it's a show of strength and something that we have to accept. And I think it's pretty disgusting when we come to terms and allow that kind of thing to happen, but reject it elsewhere. It makes me question the entire.
Well, I don't think it's for our benefit, Eric. I think it's for again, the people there. They, again, it's a, to us, bribery and corruption of public officials is all too common, but also something that's untenable. Whereas in Middle Eastern cultures, at least in Iraq, it was part of everyday life. Like the bribe, you bribed people just to get, going to the DMV. The bribe was part of the process. So there are certain things in the culture which, it's a harsh land, and it's a harsh, and the punishments are harsh. That's what they're doing. They're trying to say that, we're not.
But
I don't think it's supposed to be better. I think it's still just pretty much despicable. I don't think, but
we
what do you?
Who we buddy up with in the Middle East? Yeah,
If we don't have the Saudis, who do we have? The Kurds. I mean, the Peshmerga's badass, but they ain't that badass.
Well, I mean,
I
a couple of
understand where
things.
you're coming from, but is it time to re-examine how we approach our foreign policy there? Because, quite frankly, we are obviously supporting a place that, and I'm going to put it bluntly, a complete shithole. Like, I call Saudi Arabia.
That's the technical term.
It is not a bastion of human rights. It's a complete shithole, just like Qatar, just like nearby surrounding areas. There's nothing good to pull out of there that we can sit here in the West and say, oh, we're learning lessons. No, these places mistreat their people, and it's terrible.
Well, first, America has a very, very long history of supporting evil, crappy people. All through Central America, we have supported one scumbag, evil dictator after another who did terrible things to his people. We supported the Shah in Iran for a very long time. So, I mean...
And don't forget Guatemala.
Guatemala, Vietnam. I mean, we can go around the globe. So, I mean, I don't want to sound flip and say there's nothing new, but in fact, there is nothing new.
No, I know.
Second, the United States government are hypocritical bastards for not condemning the Saudis for doing exactly the same thing that ISIS is doing. Beheading is beheading. And the ISIS beheads based on Sharia law, and so does Saudi Arabia. I think we actually did a piece on Latest.com comparing the two organizations and how they handle things like treatment of women and stuff like that. You have to, but there is a political position, I don't know what to call it, where you try to zoom out and say, well, geopolitically, how are these things working or not?
Right.
The Vietnam went into villages and cut off the ears of children. Was that, in fact, an effective tool to control the population or not? And because it often happens in conflict, you push the issue of morality off to the side. I don't think that's a good thing, and I think a good reading of history suggests it always backfires. Go back to your
Thucydides.
Thucydides.
We do that before we need to step in and say, okay, let's change a little bit.
Oh, God, hope never. I mean, here's the thing about, because, again, it gets into this sort of the U.S.'s ability to stick its nose where it's not wanted nor that it belongs. For us, the choice is not how do we fix Saudi Arabia for her people.
No, of course.
It's how do we, the question is, if we cut off the Saudi monarchy, that would leave us no friends in the Middle East except maybe Jordan and Israel. So who's better, Saudi Arabia, the Saudi monarchy, or the so-called Islamic State? Obviously the monarchy, because they don't want to bring about the apocalypse just yet. And I think that's sort of the other side of this discussion that we often get shit on for Americans for backing what other choice is there? The broad call for coalitions of Sunni Arab troops. I mean, it's a problem if they're led by guys like al-Assad or the monarchy, because to the people on the ground there, well, that's an oppressive ass dictator who would want to fight for them too. You know what I mean? But ultimately, they have to make the same decision we do, which is the lesser of two evils. So I agree that the beheadings and the Sharia law stuff, it's stupid, it's bad, it's undemocratic, and it's nothing that America should be proud of or accept.
Or anybody in the world, not just about
Yeah,
America.
but again, looking at the situation on the ground, it's Saudi or nobody, and we need to have some friends. And I mean,
is it time to take Iran out for beers, maybe?
Yeah, you know what? I honestly, it seems I wouldn't be surprised if that was what was mostly behind this deal, is that they recognize that maybe Iran is the better ally than the monarchy.
Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, before we stepped in and kind of screwed Iran up, they were heading in a good direction.
See, the thing is, I think we're past the question of friends or allies. I think the Middle East is far too complex to try to reduce it to something binary like that. This country's our friend, that country's not our friend. Ally, foe. The United States has really a tiny handful of interests left in the Middle East. The first one is to contain terrorism there, and that can be done. First of all, by stopping giving terrorists a motive to go out and do things. It's hard to recruit jihadis to strike the United States when the United States is like, we're not paying, we don't have any troops anymore there. Second, and this is the other one is the United States' main interest in the Middle East is some version of stability. Stability keeps the oil flowing. Stability keeps a cap on terrorism. Stability is the magic word. And what we've been doing for quite a long time, you can tag it back into whatever, the 90s, you can tag it back into 9/11, is we've been doing stuff that's kind of counter-stabilizing. The war, the second invasion of, the first invasion of Iraq after they invaded Kuwait was all about stability. The goal was to return things to the status quo. And that's what we did. We kept the Iraqis out of Saudi Arabia. We pushed them back out of Kuwait. And then we abandoned the Shias and we abandoned the Kurds because their fate had nothing to do with broader stability in the Middle East. What we did in 2003 is take a huge dump on stability by removing a giant stable thing, Iraq. And then everything, fell apart. So I wonder how many friends we need. I wonder how many allies we need. I think what we probably need is what we're going to evolve with Iran, which is a way of kind of getting along that is some good, some bad, but relatively stable, something you could at least count on in the near to midterm.
It's like when Godzilla and Rodan team up to fight a third monster. They're not actually pals, but they work together. And then we're like, I won't destroy you. I'm going to go back in my little hole. I'll go back in the ocean.
Russia and the U.S. in World War II.
Yeah. I mean, is Iran Mothra or where do you see?
I feel like Saudi Arabia is more Mothra. Iran, the whole nuclear thing.
Yeah, no, I get that. Good.
All right, well, let's wrap up this. Let's wrap up this edition of Four White Guys Solve the Middle East using movie references.
Don't forget the zombie reference.
And the zombie reference.
True.
We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us. Keep reading Latest.com.